Season's greetings, boils and ghouls. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and welcome to a special holiday edition of Crypt Tuesday. Yeah, you might be wondering where the Tuesday vids went. Well, I quietly put them on hiatus because with October and the holidays, things just got too busy to make stuff like Scooby-Doomsday. Don't worry, Tuesday vids will return on a regular basis soon, but in the meantime, I'll be covering episode 2 of Tales from the Crypt, the comic that inspired it, and also another adaptation of the story between these two versions. Warning, there will be spoilers throughout this video. Episode 2 is an adaptation of EC Comics' And All Through the House, itself a story from Vault of Horror number 35. Despite this being a Christmas episode, the episode debuted on, June 10th, 1989 for some reason. I guess with season 1 of Tales from the Crypt being only 6 episodes long, HBO couldn't afford to shelve even one episode for 6 months with how sparse their lineup of original content was at the time. The irony in this is that HBO Max now has every fucking HBO show on it except Tales from the Crypt. Before chatting more about the episode though, gotta talk about the original comic story, of course. And All Through the House was written and drawn by Johnny Craig and itself was published in February of 1954 with a fucking Christmas themed cover and everything, which should give you an idea on how delayed comic publishing was back in the 50s. The issue of Vault of Horror the story appeared in was one of the last before EC Comics canceled its lineup of horror comics the following year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Christmas imagery displayed on the cover, juxtaposed by a man about to ask his wife a question, played a big part in sealing the fate of horror comics when the Comics Code Authority finally appeared, leading to the censorship for decades of an entire medium. In the story's opening, the Vault Keeper, disguised as Santa, introduces the tale, and despite the cover featuring a man about to murder his wife, the story within is the opposite. A woman has killed her husband for insurance money. The wife had apparently been planning this murder for months, but all she did was hit him over the head with a fireplace poker, not exactly a next-level murder plot. The actual killing isn't seen either, it's just implied by a cartoony womp sound effect. That was the magic of EC Comic stories. Despite their reputation, they rarely ever actually showed violence and death. It was only ever strongly implied. The dark implications create far gorier spectacles in your head than what could possibly be drawn on a page. After the woman kills her hubby, she plans to painlessly dispose of his body as her daughter sleeps upstairs while visions of sugar plums and a living father dance in her head. This matter is complicated by a radio report that states a homicidal maniac is on the loose dressed as Santa who likes to brutally dismember and murder women. The news report makes it explicitly clear, though, that the lunatic doesn't kill children and will only injure men out of self-defense, which, you know, is a strange thing to go out of the way to mention because it feels like they're basically saying if you're a kid or have a wiener, you don't need to worry if you spot the serial killer, but if you're an adult with a pussy, stay indoors. Well, as luck would have it, the killer Santa is drawn to the woman's house, but the interesting thing is that the killer Santa isn't shown for most of the comic. The woman sees him outside her window, but he's totally off panel. It makes the whole situation creepier because it builds an anticipation over when the faux Santa will actually finally appear. It also keeps the focus squarely on the woman inside the house, frantically trying to reinforce her home and hide her husband's corpse. Every panel in the story, besides one panel with a radio, has the woman in it, so it gives the opportunity to form a strong connection with this character, peer inside her mind, and see a full spectrum of emotions through what is only an 8-page story. Johnny Craig's tight writing and sharp, expressive artwork tells a lot of story in very little time. Eventually, the tale ends with the woman trying to find her daughter Carol, who turns out to have been eager to let Santa in through the front door. Luckily, it was firmly established that this maniac doesn't kill kids, so Carol gets to witness her mother brutally mutilated and killed right in front of her on Christmas. The comic isn't ambiguous about the woman's fate either. Vault Keeper reveals that he has a sack containing Carol's mother's dismembered remains. I guess he got them on eBay. And All Through the House is easily a classic EC comic tale, so it goes without saying it got an adaptation in the HBO series, but before that episode was made, the story was adapted in the early 70s for the British Tales from the Crypt flick, the first segment in the movie, in fact. It's a very faithful adaptation for the most part, but the biggest difference is that the moments leading up to the husband's murder on Christmas Eve are shown. In this version, the fez-wearing husband seems to actually be a good dude, but he's killed all the same on screen this time for that sweet insurance money by his wife Joan, played by Joanne Collins.
Merry Christmas.
The film adaptation is pretty one-to-one from here. There's still a daughter named Carol upstairs, Joan tries to dispose of her husband's corpse, and all the while the radio reveals that an escaped lunatic dressed as Santa is in the area, descending upon Joan's house. In the film version though, the killer Santa is actually shown early on, and in this version, he looks like Hannibal Lecter wearing a Santa costume made out of construction paper. A virtue of this version is the vivid color palette of the house, and it's so brightly lit. It's not the kind of location you'd normally associate with horror, but it gives you a false sense of security where this feels like a safe environment, and you forget there's a killer Santa somewhere outside. Even the husband's blood looks like it's made from a melted cherry popsicle. The big mistake this version makes, though, is with the ending. Carol eventually lets Santa Claus in the house, but in this version, we actually see him murder the woman, and it's just goofy looking. The way the guy strangles her makes it look like she's being given a shoulder massage. Now to finally chat about the TV version of An All Through the House, seen in the second episode of HBO's Tales from the Crypt. This episode had a couple big names behind the scenes. It was written by Fred Dekker of Monster Squad fame, and directed by series executive producer Robert Zemeckis during probably the busiest time of his career 5 years before he won an Oscar for Forrest Gump. He'd just come off the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the year this Tales from the Crypt episode was released was also the year when he directed Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3 back to back. This episode wasn't Zemeckis' last project about a scary Santa Claus though. Years later, he'd outdo himself with the Polar Express's disturbing Uncanny Valley Tom Hanks Santa. That film still gives me nightmares to this day, the most terrifying Christmas horror film of them all. The episode itself is also a very faithful adaptation, but with a few key additions to stretch the 8-page story out to a 20-minute TV episode. The TV episode shows the moments leading up to the husband's death as well. In this case, the dude is played by the gay coach from Freddy's Revenge, and he's quickly, unsubtly established as a super shitty husband who probably deserved to die, and so he does. And because it's premium cable in the 80s, it's gorier than the previous versions of the story.
Merry Christmas, you son of a bitch.
In this version, the dad isn't even Carol's biological father, he's her stepfather, so it's even less unfortunate that the dude was murdered.
Good night, Joseph.
Come on now.
Usually, Tales from the Crypt episodes don't try to go out of the way to make the main characters more sympathetic. The woman, named Elizabeth in this version, is played by the late Mary Ellen Trainor, who was married to Zemeckis at the time, and the episode explores her more selfish motivations for killing her husband.
What did you want for Christmas, Mommy?
I already got it, sweetheart.
Not only is she going to inherit all her husband's assets, she's going to share it with some boy toy she's seeing on the side, who doesn't answer his phone and is probably seeing all kinds of women on the side himself.
I'm out partying. Leave your name, number, and measurements.
Elizabeth also killed her husband because, according to her, he was a bit of a fatty.
Trip to the gym once in a while. It wouldn't have killed you.
Which is enough to bring him back to life briefly for one last sit-up. To make matters worse, Elizabeth is confronted by an escaped Santa Claus that looks a lot like Randy Quaid without makeup. After Elizabeth flees into her home from the axe-wielding Santa, things play out about the same as the previous versions plot-wise, but the episode is far more broadly horror. More of a slasher scenario where the killer Santa is more physical with some cat and mouse as he tries to enter the house until he's knocked out. The other big difference in approach is that this episode finally addresses the big plot hole of the original comic story. The woman wouldn't call the police about the killer Santa out of fear that she'd be arrested for the murder of her husband, but the killer Santa would be a very convenient thing to blame the death of her husband on. I mean, just take 3 seconds to think about it, bitch. The episode addresses this by having Elizabeth try to stage her husband's death as a murder, you know, by somebody else, dressed as Santa Claus.
I didn't kill him. Santa did it. Didn't you, Santa?
Of course, Elizabeth is able to kill a motherfucker with a fireplace poker, no problem, but whacking a corpse with an axe is a different story entirely. The episode is pretty close to the original comic, but the major difference is that it focuses more on Elizabeth distracting herself with getting away with her husband's murder, while the killer Santa is unconscious. It sort of lacks the same sense of dread that comes with the idea of trying to dispose of a body while also reinforcing your house to protect yourself from a killer Santa lurking outside, so it tries to make up for that by having it seem like the little girl might be in danger. It ends up feeling a little bit more like a story where a woman just didn't prioritize a situation properly. She focused on covering up her crime instead of first killing off the Santa with her dead husband's gun while she had an easy opening.
Joseph's gun!
The ending of the episode is the same as the original comic, but I also feel like it's a bit diminished in the episode because the woman didn't reinforce her home in this situation. It doesn't feel as much like an unintended betrayal by her daughter Carol, who thinks she's just letting the real Santa into the house. Santa could have easily gotten into the house through the broken window. He didn't need Carol's help at all to get in like he did in the comic or movie.
Naughty or nice?
This fact still doesn't stop Elizabeth from screaming no for like a minute. The episode's wraparound segments see Crypt Keeper taking Vault Keeper's place from the comic, masquerading as Santa, and the puppet is genuinely more unnerving than what Crypt Keeper looks like usually.
Yes, indeedy. A little terror tale chock full of holiday fear.
At the end, Crypt Keeper sheds the Santa disguise and makes it clear that the little girl in the story wasn't brutally murdered, just her mother right in front of her.
This particular Santa preferred older women. In pieces, that is.
This wouldn't be the last time Crypt Keeper got all Cryptmassy. He put out a Christmas album in 1994, Have Yourself a Scary Little Christmas. Don't you miss when horror icons would get stupid novelty albums like Freddy's Greatest Hits? I wish Jigsaw would get a Hanukkah album or some other shit. Anyway, and All Through the House is a classic EC Comics horror story with two good Tales from the Crypt adaptations that just have some minor flaws holding them back a little bit, but the story is still effective regardless of how it's told. The episode is definitely worth a watch to inject your December with a quick dose of Christmas fear. I give an All Through the House 5 crypts out of 5. Happy holidays, everybody. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, journey further into the Wolfula by clicking the subscribe and bell buttons to find out when all of my latest videos and streams go live. This video was brought to you by my kind supporters on Patreon, whose names are scrolling by. Support the channel today on Patreon and get access to bonus movie and TV commentaries, audiobooks, comic readings, film live streams, and credits at the end of videos. Finally, I'd like to give a very special thanks to my true Wolfulite supporters on Patreon and my YouTube channel memberships for their pledges. Their support is greatly appreciated and helps the channel and my dark influence continue to grow. Thank you all once more from the bottom of my evil heart for your help. Alrighty, Dr. Wolfula signing out. See you all next time at the Wolfula.